All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about the sexiest women of the 70s and 80s, with a very heavy emphasis on the ones that made it to a poster. Plus, Chris tells us what the hell he means when he says something is a downer with a banger. So, Chris, as with all things, I'm on Facebook because I'm of that age. And we already talked about this a bunch of times, but, sometimes it's nice to see what your friends ate or where they just went on their vacation or how their kids are doing or whatever. You can passively stalk other people that you knew back in the day. But anyway, you're starting to notice more and more. I know I've noticed it, these Facebook groups. It could be a club. It could just be a shared interest, whatever. Only people that like Star Wars, but not the first movie, like super specific groups. This one, and there's so many of these, right, that just says Gen X. And of course, what is it? Chris, it's only pictures of the, really pretty actress celebrities from back in the 70s and 80s wearing always very skimpy clothing, usually terry cloth shorts or Daisy Duke shorts or something like that. And I guess what just cracks me up is the comments. And again, did I mention this is all men? Like, this is one of the rare groups where you're not going to see any comments from women. And it is just the most unfiltered, wow, they don't make legs like that anymore. They sure built them differently back then. All these assumptions that somehow women were so different back then. It's like, as if there was some magical thing that made them different, that the DNA is somehow different. And it just, I don't know, there's something about that just really cracks me up. And it's always like super old school comments too, like, it's not quite this bad, but it's like, look at the gams on that broad, it's like, yeah, man, I'd like to blah, 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 that blah, blah, blah. And, when you're reading it after 3 or 4 comments, you're like, guys, you haven't gotten past this yet. Get a room. What is happening? You didn't somehow make it past the, look at that ass, kind of a thing. But, hey, we're men, I guess. But dude, it is so over the top. And I guess the hilarious part is they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about their comments. They don't give a shit who reads it. It's just the way it is. But who can you guess is on there, Chris? Of course, Lynda Carter. Of course, Heather Thomas, Heather Locklear, all the people you can imagine. Barbara Eden is a huge star, right? And you got guys from the 50s too, right? So you're going to get a lot of the 50s actresses as well. Anyway, has this run into your stream at all? Have you had this enter your algorithm?
Yes. I'll just, sure, of course. Right. All it takes is a little interaction with something from that. It could be something, right? Something from that era, that generation. Yeah. And these guys, and I know who the kind of guys you're talking about. It's funny because it's just like, I can see your comments, and I can see.
Yeah. Right.
I can see. And I think the key word that you were looking for that, from that era is, and it was probably objectification, right? Because you're right. We grew up with that. And I'm not excusing it, right? But I mean, I can explain it. And we all sat there with the beer commercials, right? We all sat there with look at the legs. We had like those sex symbols, like a Raquel Welch, say. But again, Raquel Welch was like not of our era, right? Or Raquel Welch was somebody like our dad's age, right? So something in that regard. And
right. Yeah.
So then, yes. So where do we get our sex symbols? We got our sex symbols from, you just mentioned, from television, from sitcoms. And unabashedly, that's what, and you can't blame them for it because that's the opportunity they had, but that's what they sold, right? And yes, whether it was, and we could go down to, they sold their sex appeal. They sold posters, right? We all had those posters up on that. I think I'll ask you about a couple of those posters. I think I can still see some of the ones visually that
Oh
I had
yeah.
in my
Sure.
room. And that was almost expected, right? That was a thing now, where I can guarantee if you go into your average 16-year-old's room, you probably don't see that. You don't, and we had him, I got 13 or 14 years old. I had my Cheryl Tiegs poster. I had
Sure.
Farrah Fawcett and Farrah
Yeah.
Fawcett in her famous, bathing suit.
Mhm.
Yes, the aforementioned Lynda Carter, but actually it was Wonder Woman as Lynda Carter. I think I had a Katherine Bach, right? Daisy Duke. Yes, I had a Heather Thomas, and they were on like one wall because I had like bands on one wall, and then I had sex symbols on the other wall. And
I guess it
I
depended
don't
on
know.
what kind of activity was taking place in your bedroom, whether it was listening to an album or, yeah, other stuff. I gotcha. Yeah, I like that you put it on one wall. This wall, I just turned my head and now we're going to concentrate on this. And then this wall, now I can play my music
There's
finally.
there's
I'm
no
exhausted.
distractions. There's no distractions. Do I
I
really
see.
want Geddy Lee or Rick Ocasek
Yeah.
next to Farrah Fawcett?
Oh, by the
Probably
way,
not.
nice buzzkill. If you're ever trying to get less excited about the girls that you see on your wall and you want to instantly get back to the original state before your mom walks in, there's nothing better than a mugshot of fucking Rick Ocasek or Geddy Lee to bring you right back down to the starter's position. Baseball, baseball, baseball. That'll get you going the opposite direction. Yeah.
Again, when you think about it, they were called pinups, and they were actresses and they were models, and then a whole new world opened up when Sports Illustrated of all things started, right? And I know that started in the '60s, but it really
Yeah.
kind of blew up when we were in high school in like the late '70s, early '80s when it came into the swimsuit issue, and people
Right.
would run, and I know you weren't a big sports guy, but you probably still had that magazine at your house just for that reason, right?
Well, yeah.
But
I mean, just
it,
because I'm not into sports doesn't mean I'm not willing to sport, something.
right, r-
There you go.
right. Right. But I think in looking at it, and you still see it, right? There are people now that are famous on Instagrams and the aforementioned social media, and they're famous for their looks, but we see them on their phone. We don't put them up on our wall. They're getting paid to shill for some sort of clothing line or bikinis or cologne or whatever. So that's still there's still the selling of the sex. But I think back when we were, coming of age, so to speak, in that regard, is like that it was maybe that's all it was, right? Because a poster of Cheryl Tiegs, just a poster of Cheryl Tiegs, right? It wasn't anything else. There was no algorithm behind it, right? There was no product pitch. There was no, it could have been the Swedish bikini team poster or something like that. But again, that was like a Coors Light thing or something. But you know what I mean? But there was really no product behind it. It was just, hey, middle-aged men who are now still out there commenting on like you said, getting, on the gams of somebody who's probably 89 years old, or that sort of thing. It was, I don't know, maybe it was just more pure, but it was just about that. Selling a poster, selling a calendar, selling a
Yeah.
magazine, and not like and not that we're inventing the wheel here, because we know they've used, advertisers have used sex and sexy people and good looking people, men and women, to sell products. But that was the product. It was a freaking poster that you put up on your wall and say, hey, that's Daisy Duke right there. That's, in my bedroom,
Well,
theoretically.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with the medium itself, the medium, right? So that would be paper on a wall, right? I mean, nowadays it's just everything's electronic. So I guess there's no need or something to put it up on your wall. But back then, what else are you going to do, right? You wanted a photograph that was as close to life size as possible so that you could imagine that that person is really in your room, I guess, right? And that was the only way to do it. You didn't have a 75-inch TV screen in your room. And, if you were super lucky and you might have access to the magazine that your older brother left in his drawer or your dad had in the, near the shoebox of the whatever, sure, fine. But otherwise, what other choice did you have? If you wanted some kind of visual stimulation, it was going to have to be a big poster, right? I don't know what else you could do, frankly.
Yeah, and the posters, right? They were pornographic. You could kind of get away with the poster on your wall. I don't think you'd leave those magazines. Yes, I remember hunting down specific magazines because most of our dads all had them. They all kept them in some sort of spot that we all knew how to access, right? There was, and I remember the magazines in my dad's den, and just had to put them back the way you found them, right? That was, and I remember, did you ever get caught with a magazine like that? And I'm not saying caught. I'm saying, did you ever get caught in possession? I don't want to hear if there was something else that you were caught with.
No. I guess I'm lucky that never happened, or if somehow it did, I was unaware that, somehow that had happened. But again, I guess the thing that cracks me up the most, going back to guys that are now our age, commenting on the women back then, the pinup girls and the poster girls, is that, again, they somehow think in their mind that women were different back then, like physically different. And that's the part that cracks me up, is that you as a human can convince yourself that there's somehow something intrinsically different about the way human beings were created, just 20, 30, whatever years ago. That cracks me up. No, sir. Everyone's DNA is still the same. There are still those exact women walking around the earth. There's nothing different at all, other than the clothing's a little bit different and the way that people wear their makeup's a little different. But I'm sorry, what now? They act like there's a different race of humans that existed back then, which that always kind of cracks me up.
You're right. Because I think the expectations were different, right? And they could act that way then. They got away with it then. Everybody's still the same, right? Obviously, those perspectives still exist. I always have a hard time with the social media comments, and I don't care, again, what platform it is, when somebody will make a statement or a comment or that's like, and my first thought is, other people can see what you just said. Right?
Yeah,
and it could be a political comment. It could be something really unflattering, an insult. It could be a racist comment. It could be whatever. And it's just like, hey, okay, literally thousands of people that you don't know may have seen that. And I guess, looking back at those sort of, I don't even want to know, that era, that time, yeah, it was definitely different. And you could definitely get away with that. But even, did we not know any better? I don't know. Was I objectifying anybody? I guess I was.
Yeah, sure. We all were. And it's just a cultural thing, and nobody was complaining about it loud enough that anyone knew that they were complaining about it, although I'm sure the usual discomfort was occurring back then. But yeah, look at we, like we've talked about before, back in the day, there were all kinds of stuff that we just took for granted and never thought about, like the General Lee, right, on Dukes of Hazzard. Just getting off topic for a second.
Nice pull.
Yeehaw. It's fun. Great. They're jumping over stuff. Somehow they don't destroy their transmission and that car just keeps going. We don't know how, but okay. But it's got the Confederate flag on it. And of course, Nobody's thinking anything of it because nobody thought anything of it. But it's a great example of, yeah, but you probably should have been, actually, when you really think about it, because that really is a pretty shitty thing. But I'm not going backwards in time and saying all you people are evil. No, but you have to admit, when you look back and give it some kind of new context, right? When you kind of grow as a human, you don't have to shake your fingers at everything. You don't need to be overly politically correct. The gate swings both ways. I totally get it. But you and I have talked about this many times. Sexism, misogyny, and just what I guess you would call toxic masculinity, it wasn't just alive and well back then. It was in its heyday, man. It was thriving. And yeah, people just sort of said, well, that's just the way it is, man. It's very Mad Men, right? Slap your secretary on the ass and, grab a bourbon and call it a day. Okay. Doesn't mean that people weren't still, the victims of that. It just means that nobody else seemed to give a shit enough that it became a cultural thing to give a shit. But it didn't make it right to do that just because we weren't complaining about it. So, but hey, on a more positive note, other than me laughing at these guys' comments because they are hilarious, and to your excellent point, Chris, you get so comfortable sometimes on social media, or these people do, that they really do forget that you're talking to the world. And you're right, it just cracks me up when someone lets some very dark thought slip out on the internet and they're like, hey man, and it's like, ooh, and you hear them say it and you're like, man, I'm going to have to actually reassess if I want to hang out with this dude. I didn't realize you were racist or had no problem with Nazis or, somehow, really dark things were okay with you. And that's one of those things where you have to kind of go, hey man, I'm not sure we can go back to being buddies just because, as Mark Maron, the comedian, would say, just because we both like Tom Petty, right, doesn't mean that you didn't just cross a line that's really dark, right? So, I don't know. That's just really funny to me on the interwebs.
No, I agree. I mean, but I've even, sometimes you ever gotten in a panic, and I know we don't really talk about social media too much because that's not really what we're talking about on the show, but like if you've accidentally liked something, or, to play like, oh God, I like that comment. I didn't want to like it, or I didn't want anybody to know that I actually liked it because I'm a middle-aged guy, and maybe that's something I should just be keeping to myself,
Usually that is the answer, is yes, you should. That's the normal good answer. Always assume that you should. Yeah.
If you have to give it a second thought, that's right. Just keep that thought.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
But even when you talk about the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard, not only to have a Confederate flag on the top, right, which you're just kind of like, oh man, this is a stock car that can like drive off a cliff, and like you said, and then just keep on going.
Right.
But it was also called the General Lee, right? So they could have called it the General Lee and not even had the flag. But it was just like, no, so we're doubling down on this. And yeah, this is supposed to be in Georgia, and this is the late 70s, and we still, and there were still monuments and flags, and the South will rise again. And it's just like, really? You know what I mean? It's like, do we want that to happen?
And we all know that that's not what the show was about. And we all know that the characters never, ever hit those issues. And we all know that it was just a silly show about Boss Hogg and Enos and those guys, and
nice
Roscoe P. Coltrane. But
it wasn't about Daisy Duke.
Well, it was definitely about that. But I mean, later on in life, when that thing, blows its horn, in the back of your mind, it's like, and it's okay to own slaves sometimes. That's all I hear when I hear that stupid.
I forgot about that
thing. It's just like, not. And it's kind of a soft message that it's okay to own a slave. That's all I ever hear when I hear that song, that little tune. Now it's like, geez, man.
Confederate flag, General Lee, and the horn played Dixie. Yeah, I think it's pretty bad.
Yeah,
I had forgotten about that aspect, and now I never will. Right, and it was just a show on Friday nights, and we watched it for Katherine Bach again, who I had a poster on my wall. And
let's not forget about her sister either, please, Barbara Bach.
Barbara Bach was not Katherine Bach's sister.
They can't be sisters? Oh, in my mind, there was the Bach girls. I don't know. Maybe
I don't think they were. I don't think they were.
Well,
but we'll have to check.
I guess
that out.
If there was only a way we could check, we'll have to figure that out somehow. Maybe somebody will know.
Yes, exactly.
Well, here's trivia for you. We don't do that too often, where I challenge you or you challenge me. But
all right, go ahead.
Who did Barbara Bach marry? What famous person?
She married Ringo Starr.
There you go. And what movie were they famously in together?
Caveman.
Wow, nicely done. Nicely done.
And also in that movie, a young Dennis Quaid, I think.
Really? Okay. By the way,
yes,
we're getting sidetracked, but Dennis Quaid has lost his mind. He is another celebrity that has just gone insane. One of those guys that probably, whatever your political opinion is, okay, sure, maybe keep it to yourself is always the best idea, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. But he has gone like the James Woods route, where it's just like, ooh,
yes,
dude, that is dark. Like, regardless of your, whether you're a whatever, Democrat or Republican or an independent, that's just dark. Like, I'm so sad that this is what it's come to. Do you have dementia, or is this what you've always been? And if that's what you've always been, I'm not going to be able to enjoy the movie Inner Space anymore, even though, right, Martin Short was amazing in that film and Dennis Quaid. So,
Right.
so
Right. Well, now
sad to see some of your famous stars just turning into just douchebags. Ah, it's so sad.
Right. Right. And now you understand why, Meg Ryan left him, or Meg Ryan cheated on him with
Oh
Russell Crowe.
man, it's easy to see.
It makes a lot more sense. It makes a lot more sense.
Oh yeah.
Barbara Bach at a quick trip, which we normally don't do, to the Google machine. Her real name was Barbara Goldbach, and she is 77 years old.
All right.
So she is not a Catherine Bach sister, but I like that. I like the way you were thinking.
Somehow that made sense to me as a kid,
right.
I guess. Yeah.
Right. So again, you put, getting back to our original topic, which was just much more base in what we were talking about, and the sex symbol stuff and the posters on the walls. And again, and Catherine Bach was a perfect example that you mentioned. You mentioned Heather Thomas or Heather Locklear, right? Who were on shows, again, just to be in some sort of episode of TJ Hooker, where she had to go, Heather Locklear had to go, undercover at a, I don't know, as a lifeguard, on a beach where she was wearing a bikini, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Heather Thomas, again, a stunt woman who, again, was always in, surfing or something like that. Any opportunity to get these women. And yes, they're hired for their looks and for their sex appeal. It's unabashed, and to the point of like whatever particular episode,
Or how about the Battle of the Network Stars, like you and I talked about, where they always found a way to get them wet. There was always some reason why poor Lynda Carter, I'm sorry, Lynda, somehow we have to squirt a garden hose on you. I know it seems weird, but every interview you're in, you have to be soaking wet. That's how it has to go.
The dunk tank, right? They had swim meets and they had dunk tanks to get two opportunities.
Absolutely.
And everything about that was actually some sort of athletic competition. I've never known as a dunk tank to be any kind of athletic competition. That's usually something at a carnival, right?
Yeah.
Get the principle in that. But anyway, no, so it was, again, as the sex symbols. And again, I think we kind of rattled off our favorites. There was also the,
Oh, we haven't even scratched the surface on that. Yeah.
We have not, but again, we could go on for hours and nobody wants to listen to that.
Sure.
Right. But I think that whole era, and to me, the sex part, and you can remember, I think we were young enough to when all of a sudden sex on TV became like a big thing, right? Whether it was these nighttime soap operas, or there was like Dallas, right? Or whether it was Three's Company, right? Which and they talked about these shows, right? They were TNA shows or they were jiggle shows. And they basically had like a Suzanne Summers, who you had the pleasure of working with at one point, if I remember correctly, many years after this.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But I'm glad I could jog your memory like that. I remember the story. But
it was
those
story.
whole, so sex on TV was like a big deal, right? And how far could they push? And, and Charlie's Angels, right? Another example, right? No matter what mission Charlie's Angels were going to go on, right? Except for Kate Jackson, they never put her in a bikini or anything like that. But it was always some sort of a beauty pageant, some sort of, that's whatever we can do. And I'm not complaining, right? But that is literally why people would watch. I mean, obviously the greatest thing that ever came, maybe the biggest success that ever came later in the 80s and into the 90s, when Baywatch was just about all just these beautiful people, men and women,
figured out the formula
on the beach
perfectly by then.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And they sold it globally because it sold globally. Right.
Yeah.
But this whole thing of like, so the sex, the shows that were like, ooh, that they were steamy and they had, whatever sort of sexual innuendo or sexual scenes that they could get away with on television. And I think that kind of, to me, and we got a taste of that, right? And again, I think we had talked in time when I remember when we had late night cable, and something that you could try this, maybe I can see this, I can stay up late, or I can get up late when I'll get up when everybody else is sleeping and go watch something on HBO, and maybe I'll get to see some sort of nudity, and or something along those lines. And that got to think to me, again, and it was right in our wheelhouse. They were marketed to us. This is when I think like the sex comedy came out. The movie sex comedies, yes, they'd been around for generations, but really 70s, I'd say mid to late 70s to mid 80s, late 80s, films that were driven by sex, right? And they were our point of view for the most part, right? Teenage kid, teenage guy and his buddies, and what was the whole goal was sex. How are we going to have sex?
Right.
What sort of hijinks are we going to have? What sort of escapades are going to result in us finally having sex? Probably for the first time. Maybe not for the first time.
Like we talked about, every John Hughes movie centered around, teenage awakening and somebody wanting to have sex with somebody else or wishing they were having sex. But you're talking about obviously the even bigger ones, right? I mean, what would you say would be the top three in your mind that were centered around sexcapades, and that really became the primary thing that movie was known for?
That's tough. I can think of a lot. I think the first one that I'll throw out a few, and you can throw out a few. The first one that I think of, and this is not by any means my favorite. I think I kind of have a favorite, but the first one that I think of was probably Porky's. Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing Porky's at about age 13. And what was that whole movie was based, and it was set in like Florida, which might as well have been Mars, right?
Yeah. Right.
For me at that age, right? And it was set also, it was like a period thing, right? It was like late 50s, early 60s kind of thing. But the premise was the same. These guys in high school trying to get girls. But then when you look back, and then they're also, what are they doing? They're watching girls take a shower, and right,
Yeah.
through
Sure.
a hole in the locker room, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to get girls drunk, and girls are instead passing out or throwing up on them. But the whole premise, and so I think about that, and it was sort of, and then their whole thing is you could go to Porky's itself was some sort of bar, right, way out like in the Everglades, and you could go to this bar, and they had strippers, and then maybe you could pay $4 to have some sort of sexual experience. And that was the whole plot of the movie.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
all other things happened. They had, there was like a Jewish character, so he was experiencing racism. Had a lot going on in Porky's, right? There was one kid who was like, everybody else was more experienced and everything else. And so he was the one that was the most obsessed with, sex. But
Yeah. I don't know that
know,
we necessarily need to dive into the A, B, C, and D stories and character
no,
arcs
no,
of
no, no.
Porky's.
Right. Right.
But it was complicated. You're right. I mean, as a film buff, I mean, there was a lot of things happening in that movie that were very filmic. No, I'm
Right.
joking. It was pretty silly. But it's so funny too, because every single comedy then at a certain point, Chris, had to have at least one scene with boobs or some kind of
Absolutely.
nudity.
Right.
Someone had to run by with their butt hanging out. Somebody had to streak. That just became
Mhm.
a thing in the late 70s and 80s, where you just expected it. Every single movie, no matter what it was, if it said comedy, well, that's going to have some boobs. That's what a comedy is. It's boobs. It's my one of my favorite movies of all time, Stripes. You wouldn't even think that that's a, sexcapade, sex scene kind of a movie, but honestly, it has a pretty elaborate shower scene and
Mhm.
nudity throughout. And you're like, huh, that's interesting. That doesn't really add to the story at all, but that's big time, part of it. Or of course, we talked about Animal House, which back in the day, they really made use of the quintessential nude pillow fight and made it a very
Mhm.
funny scene. But it was, like I said, just a hallmark of all of these movies that somebody had to, at the very least, have the wind blow or the dress or the top fly off or
Mhm.
something. Even if they were going to hide the nudity in, oh, it's silly, like Benny Hill, got to be in there, right?
Right. No, and absolutely. And in our minds, that was what thought the movie was worth watching, right? If you didn't get that, and so they were absolutely gratuitous. They didn't drive the story, had nothing to do really in a lot of cases. And even if you have this plot about a sex plot, it wasn't necessary, right? I think now, from what I understand, they're getting away from that in films, that they're trying to say, you don't really need these sex scenes, and you can leave it to the imagination, and it doesn't really drive the story. It's like, it was the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because I think,
sure.
again, it was like, we saw ourselves in this regard, that it was like, this idealistic life that's like, this is my goal, right? Or this is, if you have this, it was sold like, if this happens to you, if you're a 16-year-old kid and you lose your virginity, you're gold, right? Because no matter what else ever happens to you in the rest of your life, you have had this experience, right? And it could be wacky, It could be a little, as we talked about before, a little date rapey, right? It could be a little bit inappropriate, or objectifying, but it didn't really matter because these films were driven by that. And we laughed them up. I saw them all.
Yeah,
I don't know.
sure.
It's like,
yeah.
And I think, and there was the really bad ones where there was something called like Ski School, right? Or the Private Resort, it's all these things. It's like the same thing. It's like that you plop these young, horny guys down at a ski resort or at a beach resort or at college or whatever. But it was basically plot by numbers. It's like, they're going to go there. One guy's going to be a bit of a nerd. The other guy's going to be super cool. And then they're going to try to have some adventures together, so it was just like, go down this checklist. But we ate them all up because maybe, you're right. Maybe we saw some boobs, which was basically our goal. If we weren't going to see them in real life, maybe we could see them in the movies, right?
And we talked about some of even the more endearing movies like Revenge of the Nerds, a very funny, silly, cliche comedy with nerds versus the jocks. What could be more innocent than that? And yet, as we mentioned before, it's like there was some pretty gnarly scenes in that, to your point, like very stocky, almost date rapey, like just like super like, whoa, interesting. And then again, but they're nerds. Hey, or movies that I think are even more interesting, right, Chris? Is that a movie where if you look back on it, you think, how was there not nudity in that movie? This is the movie where there should have been a bunch of, nudity based on the type of movie it was, and yet there wasn't any. And I think one of them that comes to mind, unless I'm mistaken, is the Cannonball Run. I don't think there is any nudity in that movie. And yet somehow it seems like it should have been the most nude movie of all time, right? Because you have Barbie Benton and Farrah Fawcett and just all kinds of, it's got lots of jiggle, right? Like you say, it's got lots of, women in tight outfits running around, but no nudity, strangely. Interesting.
Right. They had women who were getting out of their tickets by, when they got pulled over, right? Oh, officer, how fast was I go? That sort of thing. Again, there was a lot of cleavage. I remember this one particular movie, though, called, and I don't know if you saw it. I saw it when I was around 16. As it turns out, I looked it up. It came out in like 82. It's called The Last American Virgin.
Oh, okay? Yeah.
And it's interesting because it has, first of all, the soundtrack. It's a banger. Do you remember who's on that soundtrack? There's somebody particular I would think Devo was on that soundtrack. Okay?
Oh, okay. Wow.
The Police, U2, The Cars, Blondie, just a ton of, groups were on there, so it was just like, man, this sound groups that, again, they were not quite too big to be in this kind of obscure B movie. Kid, his two friends, one guy is the studly guy, the other guy's the fat comic relief. He's trying, they're all trying to they're all just trying to get laid. He meets the girl of his dreams, who of course is, who gets, he thinks this girl, it's perfect. The girl, he falls in love with her. She falls in love with his best friend, right? Who's the studly guy. He gets her pregnant. He helps her get an abortion, and so pretty serious theme for this sex comedy that had lots of had drug use and had, lots of nudity and sex scenes, and again, a banger of a soundtrack. And then there was a pregnancy, and then there was an abortion, and at the end, I won't spoil it for anybody who wants to, although I've looked for it. I don't think it's on any streaming platform.
Yeah, I think you're okay.
Sad ending.
Yeah.
Sad ending. Okay, he goes, he's and he's taking care of the girl and got her an abortion, and he's ready to pledge his love to her, and at the end, there's a party, and she's back together with his quote unquote friend who got her pregnant in the first place.
Right.
So his heart is broken. He gets back in the car, and they play like Jeffrey Osborne or something like that, and that's it. That's the end of the movie.
And he drives off a cliff. No,
that was you.
Oh, that was me. I almost did that. That's right. Good point. I knew somebody tried to drive off a cliff.
But that was like, I remember walking out of that movie going, wow. It was a bit of a cautionary tale, right? It's like, hey, kids, this is what can happen. It was the guy he poured his heart out to this girl who then, basically ignores him. gets back with the boyfriend. The boyfriend knows what and it was a real downer, again, with a banger of a soundtrack. Okay. But I remember it was definitely not quite like the rest of those. Hey, we're going to put naked women in here. We're going to put drugs and alcohol. We're going to have parties. We're going to have kids out of control. And then in the last 25 minutes of the film, you're going to get smacked in the head with what happens with a pregnancy and an abortion. And then, oh, by the way, you did the right thing and you have absolutely nothing to show for it.
I mean, that same theme happened in Fast Times, right? It was the exact same thing. The character Damone gets her pregnant and she ends up getting an abortion. But he was the dick that didn't help her out and tried to ignore it. Yeah.
Right.
And the guy that did help her out, hey, it's kind of the opposite, right? Because the guy that did help her out, Mark the Ratman or whatever his name was. Yeah,
Ratner, yeah.
He ends up getting the girl. So I guess it was like a reverse Last American Virgin.
It was, right. And I think they came out roughly the same time, although one obviously was based on Cameron Crowe's book. So maybe they tried to rip off Fast Times. You're again, absolutely right. Great soundtrack. It had sort of the sexy, it had the famous Phoebe Cates scene.
Yeah, sure. We talked
that
about
we've
that.
all know and love.
Yep.
But again, same sort of thing. It wasn't had a heavy ending, had the happier ending, right? Because I think Mark and Stacy were actually like dating or something at the end when they gave you the sort of the epilogue of what happened to all the characters. But
they did, yeah.
So you didn't get smacked in the head. You didn't walk out, you're humming Oingo Boingo singing Goodbye, Goodbye, as opposed to that is like the saddest movie with nudity I've ever seen in my life. And I don't know how to process that information.
Wow. It had an effect on you. Well, you didn't expect a cautionary tale because Last American Virgin makes you think it's going to be basically Porky's, and in the end he'll get the girl. And we didn't see that coming, so to speak. Yeah. So, well, Chris, on a lighter note, let's talk about just growing up in the 70s and 80s. We all had celebrity crushes. We've mentioned many of them over the course of the last number of episodes. And by the way, I believe we are on our 30th episode. I don't know what that means, but it is a round number. So that is something to be said. Starting on episode 1, not even sure if we knew we would get to 30, but here we are. Chris. We're on 30.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to us. So let's start with when you were a kid. What celebrity crushes did you have when you were, just, I would say maybe in grade school to junior high school? Name some of those. I'll bet you they're going to be pretty universal, but go ahead.
Well, the one we've already named her, I think, on multiple episodes. The very first one, I think, was watching reruns of I Dream of Jeannie, right? It was after Huckleberry Hound, and it was Barbara Eden all the way. I'd never seen anybody like her. Didn't know anybody like her. Didn't know any genies, I guess. Nobody ever called me master. There was something about Barbara Eden. And again, you're thinking, and junior high school, I was probably 7, 8 years old when it was just like, wow. And then that was back to back with Gilligan's Island, and you had Tina Louise and Don Wells. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. This beats the shit out of Huckleberry Hound, right? It's like, why would I watch Quick Draw McGraw when I could be watching this? Okay. Yeah. So I think those sort of gave, and so that was just like, that's something to think about. Right. So I think going from there to then, yes, as we got into adolescence and some of we already mentioned some of these ones, the Catherine Bachs or the, maybe the Charlie's Angels when it was like, yes.
Or her sister, Barbara Bach. Yeah.
Right. Cheryl Ladd, I could think of.
Okay.
Also, those ones kind of jump out because, again, I think that it kind of all blurred together. Lynda Carter. To this day, Lynda Carter is, if I could, I'd put a poster of Lynda Carter up on this wall right behind me. Okay, so
you probably could, Chris. You probably could.
I probably could. I take a lot of flack from the family, but I could probably get away with it. But I mean, I think those, those were the ones that sort of jump out to me.
Sure.
And then, again, looking through the Cheryl Tiegs and the Christy Brinkleys of the world and things like that in the Sports Illustrateds.
Mm-hmm.
And I could probably, but I won't. I could probably name a few Playboy Playmates because, again, when we dug those out from my dad's den.
That's a whole different level. Yeah, that's a whole different level. Yeah,
Good.
sure.
Yes, because you never saw them in real life.
Although every once in a while, the celebrity crush went over to the dark side and ended up in Playboy. That was always interesting when that
That
happened.
happened, right?
I would say Suzanne Summers was one of those. Am I
Mhm.
wrong? Yeah, Suzanne Summers, Bo Derek, and some of those. Yeah,
Right. Bo Derek, another. That was apparently a thing that like these women would like. Again, they're trying to make it in Hollywood, so they
yep.
did. They go and they took nude pictures, and then for whatever reason, they ended up not getting published. And then they got famous. I think it happened. Yeah, right. Happened to Suzanne Summers. Happened to Vanna White of all people.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Bo Derek. Yes, they had. So somehow some guy would see them on TV and go, you know what? I think I got naked pictures of her in my file cabinet somewhere. And then it
Oh,
would be this
funny.
big
Yeah,
scandal,
sure.
right? It happened
Yeah.
to Vanessa Williams, who was Miss America.
Oh,
and
yeah,
she
I
was the
remember that.
first Black Miss America.
Yeah,
And then she got stripped of her crown because it was like some photo. Again, it was just like,
yeah,
hey, guess what? Guess what
yeah.
I found, right? And I think those,
Forgot about
there was
that.
a rush of that for a while, right? There
Yeah.
was definitely, it was like, and so then that was a big deal. Well, tell me about, okay, so we've hit a couple of,
Yeah.
so add to the list. If obviously I think we know about your feelings for some of the ones we talked about.
Well, sure. I mean, come on. It goes without saying that Barbara Eden, obviously. Look, I'm not going to shy away from this. If you were a witch or a nanny, I was in love with you. Okay, so that would be your Barbara Edens. That would definitely be your Phoebe Figolilli, which
Yes.
is
Nanny the
Nanny's
Professor.
actual name from Nanny the Professor. And then, of course, I really had a crush on Elizabeth Montgomery.
Right.
Obviously. My crush
Bewitched,
on
Samantha.
Elizabeth Montgomery actually didn't originally come from Bewitched. It came from an episode of The Twilight Zone that we talked about one time. But she and Charles Bronson starred in an episode where they were the only people left on Earth after a nuclear war. And yeah, that's where I kind of fell in love with her. But so sure, if you're a witch or a nanny or have supernatural powers, somehow I was in love with you. But going back before that, as a little kid, I remember having a huge crush on Jodie Foster. A lot of people kind of forget that Jodie Foster was, well, they shouldn't forget, but was a child star and in all kinds of whatever, after school specials and stuff like that. I remember having a huge crush on her. And then, of course, probably my biggest
Freaky
crush.
Friday.
Oh, man, Freaky Friday, of course, man. And then she was in a Tom Sawyer, which was a musical with our buddy Johnny Whitaker. Of course, you can't have anything in the 70s without Johnny Whitaker. But Kim Richards.
Bugsy Malone.
How about Kim Richards? Of course, right? From Escape to Witch Mountain, all that stuff. Of course, you're a little kid. These are kids that are basically your age. So when you're, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, I remember having a crush on them. But then later, as I got older, we talked about this already, but that would be your Karen Valentines and your Judy Stranges, who look very similar.
Right.
I guess I had a type there. But and for some reason, I am forgetting her name right now. It's something Cameron, but she was the actress that played Isis on the
Joanna
Shazam
Cameron.
ISIS out. Thank you. Good job.
Joanna
well
Cameron.
done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the Saturday morning version of Wonder Woman. Right.
Huge crush on her. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And by the way, that's back when it was okay to like ISIS, right? I think we were okay back then. Yeah.
Right.
Now,
right.
You're probably going to have to stop me in a second here, Chris, because I'm going kind of far with this. But how about my other crush from the Bugaloos? I think we talked about this. That would be Caroline Ellis, who played Joy, one of the live action bugs on the Bugaloos. There you go.
Okay.
That's a weird one.
I think this may have. I can't believe you've gone this far without mentioning Yvonne Craig.
Don't even start
herself,
me on Yvonne Craig. Sure, of course.
And you've skipped an entire genre that is very important to you, right?
No.
If you talk about Star Trek, right?
Oh, sure.
She was on there as well, but you had
Yeah.
your Grace Lee Whitney, right? Or even your Nichelle Nichols. These, it was just like, man, Captain Kirk. Those women, again,
sure,
they're wearing mini skirts on the Enterprise, which probably wasn't a really, really useful for space travel. And those boots, essentially go-go boots.
I don't know what Starfleet protocol is, but I just feel like, rubbing the captain's shoulders and just tons of sexual tension as your miniskirt can't be any minier. It's so interesting. Yeah. And by the way, the show that kicked Star Trek's ass in terms of sexual innuendo and sex appeal was a show called UFO, right? And
Did
UFO
it
was
really?
short-lived. Oh my God.
Okay.
The team of women that ran the moon base in this science fiction adventure, I won't even get into it, but they literally had episodes where putting their uniforms on and taking them off was like part of the episode. And you're like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what now? Am I literally watching a really beautiful woman get completely undressed on live television? Yes, you are. And she has purple hair and she lives on the moon. All the things that are super cool. And then I think any woman actress that was in any kind of science fiction thing, man. So Logan's Run, of course, I had a huge crush on Jenny Agutter, I think is her last name, but
Yeah.
she was in Logan's Run. And then Diana Rigg, my favorite from The Avengers, the British show The Avengers with Patrick
The original,
McGee.
not to be confused with the current Avengers, modern Avengers, Marvel comic Avengers. No, she was, yeah.
These were British secret agents, and she was Diana Rigg. Excuse me, she was no, her name is Diana Rigg. She was Emma Peel, was the character name.
Right,
And then I'm gonna go a little more Girl Next Door. Okay, so I'm gonna pause for a second here, Chris. Who would be your celebrity crush pick for a female actress that really kind of had more of a girl next door kind of a look? Maybe not so crazy over the top. Like I always think of Lonnie Anderson as being super over the top sex appeal kind of a situation, right? But how about someone that's more farmer's daughter kind of a thing? Who would that be? Maybe
Farmer's daughter kind of
I
thing.
don't know, just that kind of a thing.
I think
Girl next door.
Well, I think I would go just in the sense of like not the overtly sexual one, but I think I had a thing for Mary Tyler Moore. Okay, because Mary Tyler Moore was attractive, and she was also like, but and between the lines, it was like she was a single woman, right? And I think the backstory, it was like she broke an engagement and then moved to Minneapolis, and so she became like this career woman, and she became sort of a symbol, right, of like a modern woman of the 70s.
Yep.
But I think it was like, but she was also probably really non-threatening, right? Because she was good looking, and everybody remembered her from the Dick Van Dyke Show, right? When she was super young, I think from my understanding, when she was like 22 or something like that, when she was on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and she's playing this homemaker with like a 12-year-old kid, right? So she was clearly not old enough to be his mom
I never thought
in real
about
life.
that. That's right.
Yeah.
She would have been what, 10 when she had him?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good
it's
point.
like, oh, Rob, but
Rob.
right.
Yeah.
But I think that was the one, because again, totally non-threatened, because women wanted to be like her and men just liked her because she was good looking and she was smart, but at the same time she was kind of, I don't say bumbling, but she had just sort of, she was a little bit hapless and anxious and whatever, and that was all very endearing.
Yeah, well, relatable. Yeah, like vulnerable, I guess, or something. But
accessible, I think, is maybe the word I was looking for.
I really love women like her and Elizabeth Montgomery. They have something in common, which is they both were just kick ass in the entertainment industry in terms of cutting their own path. Mary Tyler Moore had her own damn studio, for God's sake. I mean, she ran shit, man. She was just an incredibly, business savvy person and all that, which went totally counter to the, kind of stereotypical stuff that she played. But anyway, yeah. And Elizabeth Montgomery, same thing, just like amazing, behind the scenes. And then Lucille Ball, one of the biggest ones, right? In fact, if it wasn't for Lucille Ball, there never would have been a Star Trek.
Correct.
Did you know that? Maybe we talked about that.
Studios.
Yeah.
We did. Yeah. That's a very, very obscure fact.
Yeah.
And no, she was much more than this. She was not that character at all.
But when it comes to Girl Next Door, I guess I was thinking, of course, you got your Dawn Wells, right? Who literally played like a farmer's daughter character. But another one to me, which you and I both love, is our friend Jan Smithers from WKRP in Cincinnati. Bailey Quarters.
Right.
Definitely the ultimate stereotype back then of the smoking hot girl who wears glasses, right? And she's the librarian, but deep down, all she has to do is take off those glasses, and by God, and then of course in that same vein, huge crush on Pam Dauber when I was younger. Oh my God.
Really?
Yeah, I really did. Yeah,
Okay.
Pam Dauber. Yeah. And then I'll hit you with this one. Of all the Charlie's Angels, there's one that isn't even close to the rest of them. My favorite of all time, and it's not the main ones you might be thinking.
Jacqueline Smith.
She's awesome. Certainly maybe second runner up in terms of a crush. But my number one, it's she was in the show later on, maybe in the last couple seasons, but it's Tanya Roberts.
Tanya Roberts, really, from Beast. She was also in Beastmaster. So
I see where you're
going
right.
with
And
this.
that 70s show later on, yeah.
Right. And I think she was also Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. That's interesting.
There's some odd.
She couldn't act to save her life.
Yeah.
I think a girl next door from a show like Charlie's Angels.
Well, I did drift there a little bit.
A little bit of a stretch.
I did drift a little bit. The last one was a drift, yeah. But I think I hit it though with Jan Smithers, Pam Dauber, and the other ones I mentioned.
Well, there was one or two sisters on Eight Is Enough, right? Because I think they had like 5 sisters and 3 brothers or something like that.
I never watched that show. Yeah, never got into it.
I can't, but they didn't have that sort of impact where I could remember their names. But I think, again, you're talking about accessible when you talked about somebody who was, like a Jan Smith, because you're right. Lonnie Anderson was this impossible, bleach blonde, voluptuous sort of ideal. And it's an interesting thing that you mentioned, Don Wells. Yes, Marianne, always in Ginger's shadow. I saw something not too long ago that apparently Raquel Welch auditioned, and they thought, we can't have this is not going to work. You couldn't have Raquel and Tina Louise. Makes sense, I guess. But that's interesting. That girl next door. What is the girl next door? Is it the one that's a little bit nicer? The one that's not going to mistreat you? What's the definition? It's going to be a little more real, a little more sensitive and compassionate, and not getting chased by all the guys. Is that the girl next door? I just want to know.
Back in the 70s and 80s, the girl next door was typified by she wasn't trying to be pretty, right? And usually that meant that she was going to be a quote unquote bookworm, God forbid, reading a book or the quintessential.
She wore glasses.
Didn't wear a lot of makeup. Her clothes were a little bit more plain and downplayed, so, but, that was always the thing is like, but hold on a second. Oh boy, here comes that episode where now she's all, made up and she's wearing the cool clothes and oh my God.
They're going to the prom.
Oh boy, here she comes down the stairs wearing the outfit. Yeah. Yeah.
And then she's not the girl next door anymore.
No.
Right? She's sort of eclipsed that. She's walked out the door. She's the girl down the street. I think, again, if you get into the objectification, it's like, well, what is the girl next door? She's more demure and she's kinder and she's not that wild, semi-trashy.
She's not seeking attention or getting attention. And oftentimes a tomboy and not into what would be considered back then, the feminine stereotypes and all that stuff. Yeah, of course. Well, I think it's interesting that we wrapped up the 30th episode with just sort of a who's who of what poster is on your wall. What movie did you have to see so you could see the quintessential again? I might have used quintessential 10 times in this episode, so that you could see the boobs in the movie. And our favorite celebrity crushes. I think we did pretty well. I was going to say something stupid like we crushed it, but let's not say that. Let's take that out in editing.
Yeah, fix that in post, would you please, Jeff?
But I think we did pretty good there, Chris. What do you think?
I think we did. I think it's jogged again. It's like I'm trying to again, the old trip down memory lane, jogging my memory. I'm sure I'll remember a couple different things that I'll text you later. And I can see those posters. I can see those shows. And now, thanks to you, I can hear the horn from the General Lee and the Dukes of Hazzard, and that will never, ever go away. So thank you
I
for
hope
that,
so.
Jeff.
I feel so happy that now you're going to hear that bizarre phrase, which really is the irony of the whole thing. So, well, awesome. All right. Well, what do you think, man? We can do 31 episodes at least. Don't you think we're good for at least one more?
Oh, I think so. We're just getting warmed up.
All right.
So,
Well, until next time, Chris.
Till next time, Jeff.